My name is Emma, and I am 29 years old. I reside in a quaint town in Massachusetts where I work as a custodian at the local school. My days begin before the sun graces the sky. I pull on my worn work boots, grab my thermos of hot tea, and walk the quiet streets to the school. My job is to prepare the classrooms for the children's arrival. I meticulously mop the floors, empty every wastebasket, and wipe the windows until they are clear. I perform my duties in silence. The teachers offer polite smiles and a simple, "Thank you," but conversations rarely go further. I don't mind. I have grown accustomed to the quiet. I met Daniel 3 years ago in a small neighborhood grocery store. I was picking up a few items after a long day at work. My face was likely flushed from the cleaning chemicals, and my hands felt rough and dry. I remember clumsily dropping a box of cereal and the contents scattered. Daniel was the one who helped me pick it up. He gave me a gentle smile and remarked, "Looks like a tough day." I managed a small laugh and replied, "They always are." Following that brief encounter, our paths crossed a few more times, sometimes at the same store, other times near the bus stop. Then one afternoon he asked me, "Would you like to get a coffee sometime?" I said yes. It felt natural and uncomplicated. Daniel worked at a local hardware store. He was a quiet man, much like myself. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words were always kind. He asked direct, simple questions and always looked you in the eye when you spoke. I found that quality endearing. During our third coffee date, he confessed, "I enjoy your company, you're peaceful, you don't create a lot of noise." It was an unusual compliment, but I knew precisely what he meant. Within 6 months, our casual meetings blossomed into something more serious. He would come to my place for dinner, and I would spend my weekends at his. One evening, he handed me a copy of his apartment key. I moved in the following month. His apartment was a modest 2-room space above a barber shop, with an old kitchen and a window that never seemed to open properly. But none of that mattered to me. I was simply happy to be with him. The initial months were peaceful. We prepared simple meals together and watched television in the evenings. On weekends, we often took long walks by the river. Daniel enjoyed fishing, though his efforts rarely yielded a catch. I would watch him from the riverbank, sipping my tea, and think to myself, "This is nice. This might be what love feels like." However, subtle changes began to creep into our life together. He stopped asking about my day. He would come home, offer a brief "hi," and then plant himself on the couch, his attention glued to the television until it was time for bed. I found myself cooking alone, cleaning alone, and going to bed alone most nights. The conversations dwindled until they were almost non-existent. At first, I rationalized it as a normal part of a relationship. People get comfortable. They fall into routines. But as time went on, the silence began to feel heavy, and I started to feel invisible. It was as if I were merely part of the apartment's decor, a background element rather than a living, breathing person. One evening, I decided to make an effort. I prepared his favorite meal, baked chicken with a side of corn. I put on a nice dress and lit candles on the dinner table, hoping to spark a connection. When he walked through the door, he glanced at the table and said, "Smells good," before immediately turning on the television. He never commented on my dress, offered a hug, or even cracked a smile. We ate our meal in the familiar, suffocating silence. As I looked at him across the table, a thought echoed in my mind. Does he even see me anymore? After dinner, I gathered my courage to speak. Do you still love me, Daniel? I asked. He looked at me, seemingly surprised by the question. Why would you ask something like that? Because you never show it, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. He looked away, his gaze falling on the television screen. I come home every day. I help pay the rent. Isn't that enough to show I love you? I had no answer for him. I simply stood up, cleared the table, and began washing the dishes. He remained on the couch, the remote control in his hand. Later that night, I sat on the edge of our bed while he remained in the living room. I looked around the room, at my clothes in the closet, my toothbrush in the bathroom holder, my jacket hanging by the door. I lived in this space, but it no longer felt like a home. The next day at work, my movements were slow and heavy. A teacher named Mrs. Nolan noticed my demeanor and said, "Having a rough morning, Emma." I offered a weak smile and a nod. I didn't have the energy to talk. I just wanted to complete my tasks and retreat. That weekend, Daniel announced at the last minute that he was going out with his friends. "I'm going to grab some drinks with the guys," he said casually. "You didn't mention this to me," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "Do I need to ask for your permission?" he retorted. "No, but it would be nice to feel included in your plans." He sighed, a look of annoyance on his face. "You always seem to need something from me." I didn't respond. He left and I was alone again. I made a simple meal of rice and vegetables, cleaned the refrigerator, and then sat on the couch, staring at the blank wall for what felt like hours. The following days were a repeat of the same cold routine. Brief words, silent dinners. My attempts at conversation were met with his usual excuses. "I'm tired," or "Can we not do this right now?" One night, I baked a small chocolate cake, something I knew he used to enjoy. I placed 2 candles on the table, a small gesture of hope. When he arrived home, I said, "I made this for us." He glanced at it and said flatly, "I don't really like sweets anymore. You know that." "But you used to," I said quietly. "Well, I don't now," he replied. I took the cake and placed it in the refrigerator. I then walked into the bathroom and closed the door, sitting on the cold tile floor. I didn't cry. I just sat there, enveloped in a profound silence. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of trying, tired of waiting, tired of feeling like I was insignificant. The next morning, I rose early. I made my tea and looked out the window at the gray, rain-slicked street. A question formed in my mind. If I were to leave, would he even care? That evening, I packed a small bag with a few days' worth of clothes. I didn't take much. When Daniel came home, I was standing by the door. He looked at me, then at the bag. "What's going on?" he asked. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while," I told him. "Why?" "Because I feel completely alone here with you," I said, my voice steady. He let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "That's silly. We're fine." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Daniel, I'm not fine." "I haven't done anything wrong," he said defensively. "That's the problem," I replied, and with that I walked out the door. My friend Laura welcomed me with a warm blanket and a hug. "You can stay as long as you need," she said softly. I sat on her couch, sipping the warm tea she gave me. That night, for the first time in a very long time, I slept soundly. Laura's apartment was a small, two-room flat near the school where I worked. It was warm and quiet, a peaceful sanctuary. I stayed in her spare room, which contained a single bed, a chair, and a soft green blanket. I had brought only the essentials with me, leaving everything else behind at Daniel's place. In the morning, I went to work as usual. I cleaned the classrooms, emptied the trash, and wiped the windows. But I felt a strange sense of displacement. I was no longer in my home, nor was I in his. I felt unmoored, unsure of where I truly belonged. Yet, despite the uncertainty, a weight had been lifted. There was no blaring television, no cold dinner, no heavy silence hanging between two people. I missed the man Daniel used to be, but I did not miss the feeling of being invisible. After work, I returned to Laura's. She had made tea and toast, and we sat together, talking about ordinary things, the weather, our jobs, a pair of shoes she liked. She didn't press me for details about Daniel, which I was grateful for. She gave me the space I needed to process my emotions without having to explain them. Daniel didn't call on the first day or the second. On the third day, a short text message appeared on my phone. "Are you okay?" I read it but didn't reply. A few days later, another message came. "I miss you." Again, I remained silent. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to hear his voice. I started taking long walks in the evenings. I would wander through the quiet streets, observing the warm lights in the windows of houses, catching glimpses of families sharing dinner, hearing the faint sounds of laughter and conversation. It filled me with a mixture of warmth and sadness. I longed for that simple connection, someone who wanted to talk to me at the end of the day, not just exist beside me in silence. At work, the routine was a comfort. The students were oblivious to me, which was fine. But one teacher, Mrs. Nolan, always made a point to say, "The room looks lovely. Thank you, Emma." Her small, kind words were a lifeline during that difficult week. One afternoon, as I was leaving the school, I saw Daniel. He was standing near a tree in the parking lot, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. He looked tired. My heart began to pound in my chest. He took a step toward me. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. "Can we talk?" he asked. I glanced around at the students and teachers milling about. "Not here," I said. "Tomorrow, then," he suggested. "At the park after you finish work." I nodded slowly. "Okay, tomorrow." The next day, I walked to the small park near the school. The trees were bare and a cold wind was blowing. I sat on a wooden bench and waited. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived and sat beside me, leaving a small space between us. He stared at his hands for a moment before speaking. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I remained silent. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "You never told me you were this unhappy." I finally turned to face him. "I tried, Daniel. You just weren't listening." He lowered his head. "You're right." We sat in silence for a moment as the sky began to darken. "I thought I was doing enough," he said quietly. "I went to work, came home, paid my share of the bills. I didn't know that wasn't what you needed." "That's not love, Daniel. That's what roommates do," I said. He looked hurt, but he didn't argue. "I don't want a roommate," I continued. "I want a partner, someone who talks to me, who really sees me." someone who notices when I'm not okay. I want someone who is willing to try. I didn't know how, he admitted. Then you should have asked, I replied. You never did. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to change. I looked at him, skeptical. Why now? Because I miss you, he said. And for the first time, I'm scared. I thought you would come back after a day or two. When you didn't, I realized I took everything for granted. I stood up. I don't know what will happen, Daniel. I still love you, but love alone isn't enough. I need time. He nodded in understanding. I'll wait. That night, I returned to Laura's apartment. She was making soup. You saw him, she asked. Yes, he says he wants to change. Do you believe him? I considered her question for a moment. I think, maybe, but I can't go back just because I miss him. I need to see the change, not just hear the words. She handed me a bowl of soup. Good, she said. Weeks turned into a month. Daniel didn't pressure me. He sent one simple text each week. Hope you're doing okay, or thinking of you. Sometimes he would leave small things at Laura's doorstep for me. A scarf I had forgotten, a new sponge for my work boots, a small jar of peach jam, my favorite. One Friday afternoon, Laura told me, you know that little plant you left behind? It's still alive. He's been watering it. I looked at her surprised. Really? She nodded. He said it reminds him of you. That weekend, I went to the park again and Daniel was already there reading a book. Hi, he said with a small smile. I sat beside him. We didn't talk much, but this time the silence was comfortable, shared between us. The next time we met, he brought a small picnic, sandwiches, water, and a simple orange blanket. As we ate, he said, I started seeing a counselor. I looked at him, genuinely surprised. You did. He nodded, just once a week, to help me learn how to communicate better, to understand my own feelings. His honesty was disarming. I don't want to lose you, Emma, he said. But even if I do, I want to be a better person, for you and for myself. Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was the profound realization that he was finally trying, not just talking about it, but actually doing something. I didn't move back in right away, but I started visiting. We cooked together again. We watched shows. We walked by the river, and this time he reached for my hand without me having to initiate it. One evening, as I stood in the apartment, I noticed my jacket was still hanging by the door. My plant sat by the window, its leaves green and healthy. Daniel brought me a cup of tea. You look peaceful, he observed. I feel different now, I said. Better, he asked. I nodded. Better. But a small voice inside me still whispered, why did it take me leaving for him to finally see me? It was a question I didn't have an answer for, and maybe he didn't either. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never again forget the lessons that silence had taught me. I spent a total of 2 months at Laura's. During that time, I worked, I healed, and I occasionally met Daniel at the park. He never pushed, never pleaded. He just showed up slowly and gently. He brought me soup when I was sick. He fixed a broken button on my coat. These small, thoughtful actions meant more to me than any grand gesture could. He was learning to express his care in tangible ways. I was changing, too. I started speaking up more, clearly stating my needs and feelings. I no longer held everything inside. And this time, Daniel listened. One weekend, he invited me over for dinner. "No pressure," he said, "just dinner." I accepted. When I arrived, the table was set with candles. He remembered that I liked them. He had attempted to make pasta. It was slightly burnt, but I didn't mind. We sat and ate, and he asked me about my day. He laughed, a real, warm laugh, at a story I told about work. I went back to Laura's that night feeling a sense of calm. "I think I'm healing," I told her. Gradually, I started leaving a few of my things at his place again. My toothbrush, a book, a sweater. He never moved them. One Saturday, we sat on our old bench by the river. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Can I read this to you?" he asked, his hand trembling slightly. I nodded. "I never learned how to say what I feel," he read. "But I want to try. You gave me so many chances, and I didn't see them until you were gone. That's when I saw everything, your quiet sadness, your kindness, and how I made you feel so small. I don't want to be that man ever again." He looked up at me, his voice soft. "I don't know if we'll make it, but I know this. I will always try from now on. I will never let silence take over again. If you come back, I promise to hold your hand every day. And if you don't, I will still be grateful that you taught me how to grow." My eyes filled with tears. I had yearned to hear those words for years, but I was no longer the woman who had begged for them. I was stronger now. "Thank you, Daniel," I said. "That means a lot to me." That night, I lay awake on Laura's couch, my mind and heart full. I still loved him, but I was scared. What if this was temporary? The next day, I walked through town, past all the places that held memories of us. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and asked myself, what do I truly want now? The answer was simple. I wanted peace. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be loved, not just coexisted with. I walked to Daniel's apartment. He opened the door, his eyes tired but kind. "Can I come in?" I asked. "Always," he replied. We sat on the couch. "I'm not coming back just because I miss you," I told him. "I'm coming back because I believe in the man you are becoming." He nodded slowly. "That's all I can ask for." I moved back in the next day, taking my time unpacking. I still spent occasional weekends at Laura's, and Daniel never made me feel guilty for needing my space. He kept his promise. He was still quiet by nature, but he communicated. He would say things like, "I'm proud of you," or "Thank you for dinner," or simply, "How are you feeling today?" The effort was constant, and that's what mattered. A few months later, we visited my parents. It was the first time he had ever come with me. He brought my mom flowers and helped my dad fix a broken door. On the drive home, he took my hand and said, "You make me want to be a better man." I smiled at him, a genuine, peaceful smile. I didn't need to say anything back. That night, I watered the small green plant on our windowsill. Its leaves were vibrant and full, a quiet testament to patience and growth.